Hey everybody, welcome to Southridge. If this is your first time joining us in this format, we want to offer a few tips on how to make the most of our time together.
Making the most of this time we spend together requires mindful and intentional engagement, as we allow ourselves to be formed by God through everything we experience. So, we challenge you to resist the temptation to just sit and watch the video. Instead, we encourage you to actively participate, just like you would if we were all in the same room together.
Be sure to crank up the volume during the music and sing along. Musicians, download the music charts below the video, grab your instrument, and play along. If English isn't your first language or you experience hearing challenges, we encourage you to turn on the closed captioning on this video. You can also download the transcripts for this morning's message to help you follow along more easily. And if you haven't done so yet, be sure to download the Southridge app. This is the latest way to stay connected and informed about everything that's happening on planet Southridge. It's completely free and super easy to use.
As we begin our time together, I want to read a passage from the Bible that reminds us how we should think about the kind of community we are as we gather together in this virtual setting. Ephesians 3:6 says, "The mystery is that people who have never heard of God and those who have heard of Him all their lives, what I've been calling outsiders and insiders, stand on the same ground before God. They get the same offer, same help, same promises in Christ Jesus. The message is accessible and welcoming to everyone across the board. So, whoever you are, wherever you are, and whenever you are, whether you feel like an insider or an outsider, we hope that for the next hour, you feel like you're among friends." Welcome to Southridge. We're glad you're here.
Hello, Tanshi. My name is Janessa Gallenkamp, and I am a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I'm going to lead you through a spiritual acknowledgement of the land upon which we are sitting right now. When we talk about the land and its original people, we acknowledge that we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by the first people who were placed here by the Creator. Long before today, Indigenous peoples have been the stewards of this land, known by many as Turtle Island. We're grateful for the opportunity to live in community here, and are thankful for the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We acknowledge and honor that the land we're on in Niagara is the land of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We honor their history. We honor those who are gone and those who are still here. We honor their presence and resilience. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaty No. 3 and is protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Treaty, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region, extending all the way up to the Ottawa Valley. This was a treaty that predates colonial contact, and it was made between the Haudenosaunee and their allies, including the Anishinaabe. The Dish has 3 simple teachings. First, never take more than your share. Second, make sure there's enough food for everybody. And thirdly, don't foul or take the dish. We also honor the land itself. She was here long before us. The trees remember the songs and stories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, and all others who passed through these lands over the years. The berry bushes remember being tended to with care, with the people and animals taking only what they needed. I often think about these things when I'm standing in my own garden, or when I see the mighty maple in our front yard swaying in the breeze. It's important for me to remember the land and my connection to it. It reminds me where I come from, and it tells me the stories of my ancestors. I'm from a place called Tiny, Ontario, but my ancestors are originally from Drummond Island. They were the sons and daughters of Cree women and voyagers who worked for the Northwest and Hudson's Bay companies. These children created a culture all their own, one filled with singing, fiddling, dancing, and color, the culture of the Métis voyagers. Following the War of 1812, my ancestors were forced to move from the land that they lived on. They migrated to Penetangmachine and the surrounding area, where my mother's family is from, and where I was born. My father was born here in Niagara. His family lived in a big house. You may know it as the John Brown House, and part of the land that they farmed would later become Short Hills Provincial Park. We must acknowledge the pain that the coming of the settlers, or second people, has caused, both to the land and to Indigenous peoples. Residential schools, loss of languages, removal from traditional lands, broken treaties, reservations, the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across our country, the opposition to the Six Nations' right to hunt. These are just some of the ways that the relationship between settlers, the land, and Indigenous peoples has been broken. Acknowledging the land and the Indigenous peoples who continue to call it home is one tiny step towards righting the relationship that has been broken and continues to be harmed by colonization. I am Métis. However, through my father, I am also of settler descent. As settlers, we need to reflect on our responsibilities as we frequent institutions like work, school, or church, institutions built on Indigenous land. Growing up in Niagara, I never heard the traditional names of the land in agreements. Indigenous peoples were talked about in past tense, and the struggles they face were placed in the past as well. It's easier to deny Indigenous peoples their rights if we act like their struggles don't exist anymore. As settlers, and as the church, we must make the promises and challenges of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. We also need to recognize that this good land is the Creator's land, not ours. It's a gift. It was never meant to be bought and sold, but to be enjoyed and appreciated by all. When you take care of the land and are in good relationship with it, it takes care of you in return. As the Bible says, what you sow, you will also reap. We must be people willing to learn and take part in the healing and reconciliation of this land.
Come, oh, come, be our light, drive out the darkness. Come, Jesus, come. Every year under the thorn, every wrong that we have known, every valley will be raised, ancient ruins will be remains. Come, oh, come, be our light, drive out the darkness. Come, Jesus, come. Every weapon made for war, every gun and every sword will be melted in the flame to be used for garden name. Come, oh, come, be our light, drive out the darkness. Come, Jesus, come. In the emptiness of grief, through the night of suffering, in the loss and in the tears, God of comfort, oh, be near. Come, oh, come, be our light, drive out the darkness. Let's sing this next part together. The riches of this world will fade. The riches of this world will fade. The treasures of our God remain. Here I empty myself to owe this world nothing, and I find everything in you. The riches of this world will fade. Treasures of our God remain. Here I empty myself to owe this world nothing, and I find everything in you. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you. Take my life a sacrifice. In you alone I'm satisfied. Here I empty myself to owe this world nothing, and I find everything in you. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you. Not my will, but yours alone. Not my strength, but yours alone. Nothing else but you, oh Lord. I find everything in you. Not my will, but yours be done. Not my strength, but yours alone. Nothing else but you, oh Lord. I find everything in you. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender all to you.
I don't know if you've ever heard of a centering prayer before. Maybe you've even tried one. But this morning we're going to practice something together called a decentering prayer. The idea of a decentering prayer is to challenge us to remove ourselves from the center of our own lives through prayer. Now, if that seems a little abstract, think of it this way. If your life were a movie, you would be the main character, right? I mean, you're in every scene, you have most of the lines. It's your life as a movie. But the life Jesus calls us to is a life devoted to worshiping God and loving our neighbors. It's about recasting Jesus as the main character in the story of our lives, giving God top billing over the marquee that hangs over everything we do. And loving our neighbor is all about putting the focus of our energy and attention on others, reimagining ourselves as simply part of the supporting cast. And so for the next few moments, I want to invite you into an imaginative prayer practice. So first, just try to get comfortable wherever you are. If it helps, you can close your eyes and just allow yourself to be guided by my voice. I want you to recall a memory, call it a scene, from this past week of your life. Choose one that stands out as having been important for some reason, and that included at least one other person, even if only virtually. Now, in your mind's eye, I want you to go back and visualize that scene, but think about the other person who was in it. What were they feeling? Do you know? What were they saying? Can you remember? How did your presence there impact them? This can be a bit hard to do, so I'm going to give you a moment to just think about that. Now go back to that same scene and ask yourself, to what degree was God featured in that experience? Did God get any screen time? Were you aware of God's presence? Do you imagine God in the audience, laughing, cheering? Do you imagine him playing the role of a critic? How did God experience this scene? Now stay in the moment a little longer and ask yourself how this scene might have gone differently if God and the other characters in the story had gotten top attention in your heart and mind instead of yourself. What would it have looked like to turn up the volume on their words? To tune into their thoughts, to feature their feelings and put the spotlight on their experience. Would things have gone differently at all? What might that have looked like? as we as a community continue to learn how to decenter ourselves, I encourage you to spend time this week thinking of ways to reposition yourself as a supporting cast member. First and foremost, to God's leading role in your life. And secondly, to the people you encounter in your day-to-day. For example, you could set a repeating alarm and pray, "Not my will, but yours be done," throughout your day. You'd try to go through an entire day without using the words I, me, or my. You can do a task that you feel is beneath you. Or anonymously send a gift, leave a note of encouragement, or drop off a meal. We'll have a bunch more ideas like that for you to engage in throughout the week, either from the downloadable Practice This Week resource below the video player or through the spiritual practice notifications in our app. But for right now, I'm going to throw it over to Erica to lead us in a decentering prayer together.
Jesus, help me to decenter myself. Let my world revolve around you and those you love. Let your will be done and my will be laid aside. Let your kingdom come and let my kingdom go. May you lead while I follow. Let others rise while I remain still. Let others go first as I learn to wait. Let others gain as I learn sacrifice. I reject privilege and pride, repent of self-importance, and remove myself from the center of the story, to be repositioned as you see fit, reassigned as the servant of all. Amplify the voices of others and teach me to listen. Let the achievements of others be celebrated and teach me to remain anonymous. Let others be honored, teach me to serve in love. Amen.
As we continue to practice decentering ourselves, one of the ways we can do this in a practical way is through the pooling of our financial resources. It's a chance to offer back a portion of what we have been blessed with in order to contribute to the ways that God is working in our church, in our community, and beyond. If you're able to give today, you can find links below for several ways to do so, or you can also visit our app. But just let me say, if you're new with us, maybe this is your first Southridge service, we're not looking for your money. We're just glad that you're here and we hope that you feel welcome. We actually have a gift that we'd like to send to you. So if you scroll down to the section for newcomers below, and if you're comfortable sharing your contact information, we'd love to send you a jar of our Artisan Southridge Jam. No strings attached, just our way of saying hello, we're glad you're here, and we hope you know that you're among friends. Now, normally at this point in our weekly service, we take some time for a bunch of community videos, a chance to see some familiar faces on the screen and be reminded of the larger church family that we're all a part of. But today, I want to take this time to encourage you to stick around after the service and let yourself be a face on the screen as part of our virtual lobby. It's a low-key and casual Zoom call where we can gather together as a community to say hello. Even if you can only join in for a couple of minutes, we'd love to see you. You can find a link for the lobby under this video player on our online service page or in the video description of our YouTube page. We'll get the virtual lobby going immediately following the service, and we'd love to see you there. Now, today we're wrapping up our all-inclusive faith series, and I don't know about you, but I have found these past weeks to be super challenging when it comes to dismantling my own privilege and changing my heart to be more like Jesus. If you haven't checked out the first 3 weeks of this series, it really is worth going back to check those out. But for today, here's our inspiration pastor, Tom Lowen, to wrap things up.
When was the last time you thought, I can't wait to get to the point in my life when fill in the blank? Lately, it's been a constant drone in our home, especially for our youngest, Hudson, who at 3 years old is endlessly frustrated that he can't do everything his big sister can. He can't wait till he no longer has to wear a pull-up to bed like his big sister. He can't wait till he can use a needle to sew like his big sister or eat rice with chopsticks like his big sister. And he can't wait till he can ride a horse without mom holding the reins like his big sister.
Yep, you can take her all the way over there. On your own.
I can't wait till I'm 5.
When we're young, we all feel like Hudson. We can't wait until we're old enough to drive or old enough to date, old enough to get a job and move out. But this feeling doesn't fully leave us as we get older. At 43, I still feel this way. I can't wait till my mortgage is paid off or until all my kids can wipe their own bums. until all our renovations are finished, or I can begin to imagine retirement. I can't wait till I no longer feel like all my musician friends are better than I am. But whether we're raising our kids or just trying to figure out how to be adults ourselves, we all share some basic ideas about what being a real grown-up looks like. It's about attaining some level of mastery and control, acquiring a certain level of ownership and possessions, and achieving a level of independence and self-reliance. This is what we want for our kids and for ourselves. And lately I've been realizing that I think we often apply this same definition of maturity to our spiritual lives. It's like when we're starting out, we don't know how to pray and we have no Bible knowledge and we need lots of help to help us control the sin that seems to dominate our lives. But by the time we become spiritually mature, we've mastered the art of prayer. We've acquired cover-to-cover chapter and verse Bible knowledge, and we no longer need to depend on others to manage our sin. At least that's what it's supposed to look like, right? But what if I told you that that is the exact opposite of how Jesus describes what it looks like to become a spiritual grown-up? Jesus' closest friend was his disciple John, who in his biographical account in the Bible describes a conversation between Jesus and Peter, one of the leaders on whom Jesus said he would build the church. And envisioning Peter's influential trajectory, listen to how Jesus describes his future. He says, "I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go." According to Jesus, maturing in our faith is not about attaining, acquiring, and achieving some level of control, ownership, and independence. Those are actually the qualities of spiritual adolescence. Becoming a spiritual adult is actually about embracing surrender, sacrifice, and submission. It's about being willing to be led to places we don't want to go. Now, I wonder how many of you have felt in this recent message series like we've been being led to places we don't want to go. In week 1, we discovered that while all people are created equal, some of us, and those often considered to be the least, can actually reveal the nature of God better than others according to Jesus. Then 2 weeks ago, we learned that while all are needed in the body of Christ, the Bible says that some are needed more than others. And in fact, they're the very ones who we're often tempted to undervalue. Then last week, we declared that all are welcome, but according to Jesus, some are more welcome than others, specifically those who often feel the most unwelcome. And throughout this series, we've invited people who've been devalued, marginalized, and excluded because of things like race or disability or sexual orientation to be honest with us about their experience. And it's been uncomfortable, to say the least. But what if, as Julia Chickenbarrow said in the first week, being uncomfortable, being led to places we don't want to go, to stare at realities we don't want to see, and own up to behaviors we don't want to change, is exactly what Jesus wants for us? What if maturity means being led to the very last place any of us would choose to go? Because that's exactly how John explains what Jesus meant in his conversation with Peter. He goes on to say that Jesus said this to show the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And after saying this, Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me." Now, history tells us that Peter did in fact follow Jesus in death by being crucified. But Jesus' words here are not meant only to be understood as a prediction about Peter. They're a summary of the invitation of Jesus for all of us to follow him. As the Apostle Paul says, adopt the attitude that was in Christ Jesus. In other words, follow Jesus. Though he was in the form of God, he did not consider it being equal with God something to exploit, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a slave and by becoming like human beings. And when he found himself in the form of a human, he humbled himself by being obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Here we see Jesus selflessly relinquishing every last drop of power and privilege for the benefit of others. First relinquishing his status as God to become human, then sacrificing the dignity of humanity for the degrading life of a slave. He then lays down that life and ultimately embraces the shame and humiliation of being crucified as a common criminal and failed revolutionary. Now, to be clear, Jesus too was being led to a place he didn't want to go. We're told that the cross made Jesus so anxious that his sweat became like drops of blood as he begged God for another way. But he rejected the way of comfort and privilege and instead chose the way of discomfort and sacrifice, the way of the cross. And he invites Peter and us to do the same. Now, I assume most of us would say that we want to follow Jesus, but do we? I mean, do I really want to follow Jesus in the way of the cross? I mean, if I'm fully honest, I haven't relinquished my power and privilege like Jesus. I've relied on it, intentionally and unintentionally. Like many of you, my life demonstrates the subconscious belief that my faith should provide me and my family with certain benefits and advantages, a certain level of comfort and security. Faith isn't seen as something that's meant to dispossess us of those advantages, but to reinforce and solidify them, to help me gain mastery, possession, and independence, and to center me and my experience. You see this in how, like many of you, I tend to flock together with birds whose feathers are the same color as mine. I listen to worship songs and sermons and podcasts that connect emotionally with my reality, not ones that push me to orient my life around someone else's. I get involved in programs that give me the chance to use my gifts, not the hidden thankless ones that require more time and effort than I really want to give. We like the social media posts we agree with and block the posters whose views offend us, creating this algorithmic echo chamber that reinforces our ways of thinking and makes us wonder why some people just don't seem to get it. And we give to the level of our comfort, but not the level of our capacity. And we're drawn to environments that validate our desire for upward mobility, not ones that demand that we sacrifice our advancement to see others move up. I mean, sure, we've loved our neighbor, but not as much as we've loved ourselves. We act as though everyone should care about the issues that affect us, but we don't take the time to learn about issues that we don't think matter, simply because they don't matter to us. I think if most of us were to be completely candid, we'd admit that when we think of an all-inclusive faith, we're more drawn to the kind of all-inclusive resort kind of faith that prioritizes and pampers me than to the kind that means I've got to move out of the way to make room for someone else's experience, or prioritize someone else's contribution, or even listen to someone else's voice. Unlike the Jesus we claim to follow, we don't curse power and privilege. We cling to it, even convincing ourselves somehow that it's a sign of God's blessing. All this has led to what I refer to as Christian supremacy, a belief that God made the world and all its bounty to benefit and revolve around us, seeing our privilege as some sort of spiritual birthright. And the result has been, as Mike said last week, a church where Sunday mornings are the most segregated hour of the week, where Christians are known for our politics more than our love, claiming to be some kind of moral majority while trampling the rights, denying the dignity, and ignoring the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We use phrases like "come as you are," but then we belittle those attempting to transition into a truer version of themselves. We quote Jesus, who said, "I came not for the healthy but the sick," but then we ignore and avoid people with developmental disabilities, individuals on the autism spectrum, or those who struggle with mental health. This isn't what following Jesus looks like. The church isn't meant to be a club for people with wealth, talent, business acumen, stage presence, people from traditional families who look like us and don't make us too uncomfortable. It doesn't exist to cater to the already initiated and accepted. It's the opposite. The church, we, not the organization, but all of us individually and together as people, we exist not to serve ourselves, but to care for those who have nothing, the poor, the sick, the outcast and abandoned. The earliest churches were communities built not around the haves, but the have-nots, led by day laborers, social and literal lepers, women, singles, the poor, disabled, and the sexually scandalized. Upon the very people that the religious elite despised, Christ built his church. And God was able to do this because those earliest followers understood that this is what spiritual maturity looks like. This is the way of Jesus. It's the way of the cross. I'm currently reading a book that challenges readers to identify their own privilege, and it's helped me for the first time see with clarity the privilege that comes with being a first century white in a predominantly white region, straight, married, cisgendered, male, child fathering, intelligent, you could probably debate that one, educated, employed, wealthy, middle-aged, able-bodied, neurotypical, addiction-free, healthy, land-owning, landlording, first-world dwelling, passport-holding, Christian in a predominantly Christian society, natural-born citizen of the country in which I live, from an intact, living, middle-class, nuclear family with almost unlimited community support and no criminal record. On top of all this, I realize I began by showing a video of my daughter riding her own pony, cue the Seinfeld reference. So what I'm about to say applies first and most to me. To the privileged like me, equality can feel like oppression because we're not used to it. But it's not. We with privilege must learn to decenter ourselves in order to prioritize those who've been and are still being deprioritized by society and the church. To learn that privilege isn't something good to be shared. It's something harmful to be dismantled. That's why we can't think of diversity as an act of charity, like, giving a little bit of our power and privilege away to those in need, but as an act of discipleship, without which we will never experience the fullness of God's kingdom. Now, if that wasn't clear enough, I'll say it again. We live in a system that offers advantages and privileges to people based on our whiteness, our straightness, maleness, neurotypicalness, able-bodiedness, and other superficial characteristics, even our Christianity. This is the very systemic injustice Christ died in part to dismantle. And I'm not saying that whiteness or straightness or maleness are bad. I mean, they're not, and they're also ways that God's image is revealed. But anyway, these unearned qualities make life easier on us or better for us at the expense of others is an example of injustice and is harmful to the furthering of God's kingdom. The only way to deal with them is to become aware of them, address them honestly, and nail them to the cross with Christ. Now, I know how overwhelming all this sounds, but imagine how good it could be. Imagine a church where everyone can see someone who looks like them on our screens and stages and at all levels of leadership, where we run our highest quality programming for kids with Down syndrome, autism, or cerebral palsy in a way that is fully accessible to everybody. Imagine letting God show us what it looks like to make amends with our Indigenous siblings, and then being led by them in things like peacemaking or slow listening and creation care. Imagine the Black people around us no longer having to wonder if their lives matter. Imagine doing the hard work of welcoming immigrants, not just into our country, but into our community. Imagine us, becoming the people LGBTQ plus individuals feel the safest around, the most loved by, seen not as pariahs, but as prophets of grace and acceptance. Imagine the single and childless in our circles being treated not as anomalies or oddities, but honored as some of our most valued family members. Imagine what we could learn about true family from single parents, adopted children, and parents of blended families if they would be honored as heroes and healers. Imagine instead of mocking millennials, we encouraged and handed over leadership to our youth, not forgetting to be guided and guarded by the wisdom of the elderly among us. Imagine showing hospitality in our words, loving people enough to use the pronouns and labels they choose for themselves. Imagine blessed are the poor being more than just a saying. Imagine following Jesus so closely that every person, no matter what they look like, who they love, how they identify, felt loved, included, and valued. To become a community where outsiders become insiders, foreigners become neighbors, enemies become friends, and strangers become siblings. Where age, gender, race, sexuality, disability, neurodiversity, life stage, lack of education, and financial instability aren't viewed as barriers to realizing God's ideal, but as bridges into a new world that looks a lot more like the every nation, tribe, and tongue, full spectrum, all-inclusive diversity of God's entire family. If you, like me, want to follow Jesus into that kind of future, it's going to take more than believing, wanting, hoping, or even praying for it. As a Black member of Southridge said to me last year at the height of the BLM protests, only doing something does something. We've got to work for it every day and for the rest of our lives, laying down our privilege with Christ. So maybe for you, the first step is more awareness. If so, go back and complete the diversity assessment from week 1 of this series. Or take time to journal your way through a book like Me and White Supremacy. Or start a conversation with someone who doesn't share your privilege with the sole intention of listening, learning, and being changed. Maybe it's time to forge some relationships with individuals on the margins. You can email Nate Dirks, who will help you get involved in one of our anchor causes, not as an act of charity, but to develop friendships that will truly make a difference in you and in them. Or visit the Niagara Regional Native Center when it's open again, or one of the local reserves to see firsthand the impact that our home in native land has had on its first people. Perhaps your next step is to take some concrete action, like doing an audit of your vocabulary, to rid yourself of certain phrases and words that mock and insult people without privilege, like "that's lame," or "that sucks," or "that's crazy," or dozens of other common expressions we may not even realize are dehumanizing. Or perhaps you need to deaccumulate some of your wealth and possessions and redirect them to those who face significant barriers to earning a livable wage. Maybe your next step is one of advocacy, working for more level ground accessibility for people who tend to get excluded on purpose or by accident in the places where you work and play. Maybe, and perhaps most importantly of all, maybe you need to get away with God in prayer, to listen and be directed by God and what your next step is down the way of the cross. But whatever you do, don't just sit back and agree or disagree. Because at the end of the day, only doing something does something. I don't know about you, but I can't wait until you and I will finally be grown up enough to follow Jesus like that, to become people who maturely trade in our comfort for the cross, to be led by God to places we don't want to go, places we haven't even imagined yet, and there discover the unimaginable beauty and diversity of an all-inclusive faith in an all-inclusive God. As we've been doing all series long, we're going to hear now from someone who's been processing what this needs to look like in their life. Here's Ron Dick.
Yeah, well, Ron, it's not preferable to be hanging out via video rather than in person, but it's still really great to see you. So would you tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up as a part of our Southridge community?
Yeah, I started attending Southridge just at the time that Southridge expanded into multiple locations. I'm now at the Welland location, and it's given us a lot of opportunities in terms of working with the Harvest Kitchen program.
In relation to that, even a year ago, you began a bit of a new part of your faith journey. And can you tell us a bit about what God has been doing in your life since that time?
Started during the initial short-term group that you led. We had heard from John Johnson, and he went on and talked about land. And admittedly, I got really indignant. It didn't seem right to me that we should feel responsible for what he was talking about. As a matter of fact, I felt so strongly and so indignant that I began to write you an email. It was at that moment, as I was writing this, I had what I can only describe as an epiphany. The lights kind of went on, and I began to see that, like, their condition, or plight, if you will, of the Indigenous people was not unlike my ancestors. And it just really became clear to me that just as the Russian government had oppressed and tried to kill off the Mennonites, so has the white men done to our Indigenous people.
Why was this an epiphany moment for you and not just something that you learned factually and then kind of moved on from?
It wasn't until I tried to defend my callousness towards the Indigenous people that it suddenly struck me. There were parallels there. And I have to say, like, it was in that moment that the Holy Spirit opened my eyes. And I began to understand that. And it just became really real.
So how did you then connect this to your family history in ways that were similar and then that were different from your own story?
And I guess it differs largely because when the Mennonites were in Russia, they weren't allowed to worship. But when they came here, they had those freedoms. And they were allowed to worship as they pleased. They carried on their culture, and they used their hard work ethic to prosper. Our Indigenous neighbors weren't so fortunate. Much of their suffering that our Indigenous neighbors experienced was in the name of God, so to speak. Initially, as a result of colonialism, then broken treaties, and up until recently, the social schooling programs, the effects of which, are going to continue to haunt them for some time if something isn't done.
Yeah, absolutely. But this speaks to sort of a sense, not just that this just happened, but that we have that we've had a role to play in this and culturally. And Ron, I've heard you say that when it comes to the broken relationships and that occur that we have here with our Indigenous relatives, that we need to take responsibility. So like, why is that?
When someone is neglected, abused, and the various things we talked about, when that happens to a people, the effects, they don't just disappear. Like, they remain with the person. They have long-term effects. And I think it's obvious that that's what we're seeing in their cultures. We've benefited from this land. We've benefited over time from what this land has to offer. But we couldn't have done that except that we kicked them to the curb. And that brings up that uncomfortable word, privileged. It is a word that can be uncomfortable, obviously. But when you look at this a little closer and you look at what was compromised or what was sacrificed for what we have today, whether your ancestors came over on the Mayflower or they landed yesterday, right? Or you came here yesterday. Yeah. Anybody that lives here is benefiting from this country, the resources that this country has, et cetera. I've talked to people about this and they say, well, the natives lost the war, so let's just get on with it. But that's not true. Okay. There was no war, there were no victors. What there were treaties, promises, and covenants that were repeatedly broken.
And I appreciate your perspective on that and saying like that's actually an important identity feature for us, that we need to realize that it's a part of our identity. And if it's a part of our identity that we have like broken treaties as a part of who we are, that's probably something that we actually need to deal with and not bypass.
That was very well said. Exactly. You can't come here, expect to, appreciate the freedoms that we have and ignore how we got those.
So what steps did you take and have you taken over the last year to try to connect and try to move things forward?
I can only describe that as being willing to have your heart changed for, the people, the neighbors, the people around us that are suffering or that are in need.
Within that, I know you've also spoken about, your eyes being opened to where we find Jesus. And what's your experience of the presence of God among our Indigenous neighbors and relatives as that's been growing for you?
The Indigenous culture, I think, can teach us a lot about what it means to be Christ-like. Like, we'll stockpile or even hoard food. And they're eager to share theirs. They've always taken the stewardship of land seriously. And I'm not sure we can say that.
I mean, what would you say to us as a Southridge community when the spirit that we're sometimes exuding is, I didn't perpetuate these traumas or against the Indigenous community, or like, sure, there was a messy past, but we should all just move on, or basically it's not my responsibility. What would you say to us as a community when that's kind of what we exude?
Okay, so let's, like, for argument's sake, let's put aside the privilege that we have here in Canada, and let's say that it wasn't at the Indigenous expense. Let's say it's not our responsibility. It's not your or my responsibility personally that these treaties were broken. The question that I'm stuck with is, how are we as Christians then, with good conscience, ignore what is happening to these people today? Think about, what that kind of thinking leads to. If I can absolve myself of responsibility for how my neighbor is suffering, eventually we're just living in a society of our very own, let's call it our very own happy, selfish life.
So what would you say to someone at Southridge who's just awakening to the reality of their privilege, or maybe resisting into digging into understanding it?
It's in the doing that we receive God's blessings. It's in when we take that step and we're willing to say, okay, I'm willing to venture into this. Like, these problems with the Indigenous go deep and they're not going to be resolved easily. And the most important first step would be to say, like, okay, Lord, how does my heart need to change in this? Maybe the word privilege isn't so bad and I can appreciate what it means. And how does my heart need to change towards our Indigenous neighbors?
And I see you taking that responsibility, and I feel challenged by that. And I really appreciate having this conversation and your willingness to just be able to share with our whole community today. So thanks so much, Ron.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It was great.
Teach me to serve and to put others first, and then give up my time just to be last in line.
If I humble myself before everyone else, will you teach me to love, seeing others move up?
And if you say it's blessed to give more than I get, go above and beyond, take the dirtiest jobs,
then with pure motives, let me go unnoticed. Let me live with the view that I'm working for you.
though it's not at all like me to live so selflessly. Jesus, you can change my heart. Teach me to serve, to lay down my privilege, give up my rights. Teach me to serve, to see others' interests as greater than mine. 'Cause in your kingdom you give worth to the last before the first. Teach me to serve. So teach me to serve. Let me shoulder your tears, hold your hand through your fears, and let me quietly listen. Loving you is my mission,
And I'll patiently wait. I will offer you grace, putting my wants aside, having your best in mind.
though it's not at all like me to live so selflessly. Jesus, you can change my heart. So teach me to serve,
to lay down my privilege, give up my rights.
teach me to serve,
To see others' interests is greater than mine. 'Cause in your kingdom you give worth to the last before the first.
so teach me to serve,
Lay down my privilege, give up my rights.
teach me to serve,
To see others' interests is greater than mine. 'Cause in your kingdom you give worth to the last before the first.
so teach me to serve, so teach me to serve. Let's sing this next song out to the one who laid down not just his privilege, not just his rights, but his whole life to show love for us. So let's sing this out together. Who breaks the power? Who breaks the power of sin and darkness, and whose love is mighty and it's so much stronger? The King of glory, the King above all kings. Who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder, and who leaves us breathless and in awe and wonder? The King of glory,
the King above all kings. Oh, let's sing this out. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross, you would lay down your life, that I would be set free. Yeah. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Who brings our chaos? Who brings our chaos back into order, and who makes the orphan a son and daughter? The King of glory, the King above all kings. Who rules the nations with truth and justice, and shines like the sun in all of his brilliance. The King of glory, the King above all kings. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. Oh, you would lay down your life, that I would be set free. Yeah. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. And worthy is the Lamb who was slain, and worthy is the King who conquered the grave, and worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave, and worthy is the Lamb who was slain, and worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Sing it out. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Oh, we sing worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, yeah, you would bear my cross, you would lay down your life, oh, that I would be set free, yeah. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. So we sing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave, and worthy is the Lamb who was slain, and worthy is the King who conquered the grave.
We are a community of imperfect people
who desire to put into practice the good news that we preach.
Our faith is not about an hour of watching or attending.
It's about a lifestyle of full devotion to Christ.
Not just as something to believe in, but someone to follow.
We don't want to talk a good game on Sunday,
only to remain unaffected or ineffective for the rest of the week.
So while we gather each week to sing, pray, listen, and learn,
we know that an hour a week will never produce the life change that we so desperately need.
It requires a daily investment of time and training.
It takes practice.
And practice.
And more practice.
And when we mess up, we forgive ourselves and each other.
Then help each other up and keep practicing.
As we go now, into the rest of our week.
May we not just be hearers of the word,
but doers also.
May the Spirit of God fill us to make us kind and compassionate,
honest and humble,
generous and hospitable,
those who repay evil with good,
respond to injustice with action,
overcoming despair with hope.
Let us be known, not by what we're against,
but by what
and who we are for.
And most of all, let us love one another, because God is love.
It's been good to be together.
But now it's time for us to go.
In the name of the Father, who loves us unconditionally.
In the name of the Son, who restores our true humanity.
And in the name of the Spirit, who empowers us to live life to the full.
Amen.
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 Thanks for joining us today. We hope that you felt inspired and challenged by our time together. As we continue growing into a church that is accessible, welcoming, and inclusive of everyone, we hope that you'll embrace God's all-inclusive heart in your life as well.
Now, we know that for what we've heard today, to become reality in our daily lives, it's going to take more than this 1 hour a week we spend together. It requires a moment-by-moment, 7 days a week commitment to practicing the way of peace and the way of Jesus. That's why we provide a host of ways to continue to lean into God's presence while we're away from each other. As always, you can click the Practice This Week button below the player for daily spiritual exercises to continue to develop the muscles we've started building today. If it helps, you can also opt into the Spiritual Practices notifications on our app to get those helpful reminders every morning as you start your days.
As always, we're going to put some questions on the screen in a moment. If you're watching with others, they can serve as great conversation starters, but they can also be a great way of processing what you've heard today on your own. And if you'd like a more personal conversation with someone about anything that's going on in your life, we invite you to reach out to our location pastors who will follow up with you for a more private conversation. Simply go to southridgechurch.ca/contact.
And one last thing, we want to invite you to join us back here next Sunday as we launch back into our journey through the Old Testament book of Exodus. This next series is going to give us the opportunity to brush up on some of the basics of a life with God, whether you're a longtime follower of Jesus or new to faith. This series will guide us in the practical basics of what it means to live out an everyday relationship with Jesus. We hope you'll join us.
Well, that's all for now.
Have a great week.